A man sits on a ridge of jagged limestone in the Judean wilderness. The sun is dropping, throwing long, violent shadows across the dry ravines. But if you look closer at the unforgiving geography of the ancient Middle East, at the lethal tools of the trade, he looks at the thieves who climbed over the wall, and he strips their titles away. I am the Good Shepherd. This is not a gentle introduction. It is a declaration of war. When Jesus claims this title, he is pulling the pin on a prophetic grenade. He is declaring that the corrupt shepherds of Israel are officially fired. And he is declaring that the God of Ezekiel is standing right in front of them, smelling of dust and speaking in a Galilean accent. He points to the reality of the ancient pasture. A sheepfold in the hills is not a barn. It is a crude circle of stacked rocks out in the open air. There is no wooden door. There is only a narrow gap. When night falls, the shepherd lays his own physical body across the opening. He becomes the gate. Nothing gets to the sheep without stepping over his chest. The hired hand sees the shadow of the wolf moving in the brush. The hired hand calculates the risk. The hired hand drops the staff and runs. The predator strikes. The flock scatters. But the true shepherd stays. He braces for the impact. He absorbs the violence of the teeth and the claws. He lays down his life for the sheep. He speaks. And the flock knows his voice. They do not follow the stranger. They flee from the thief. At the social status of the actual men who held the staff, you start to see something the stained glass version completely erases. They know the cadence of the man who bleeds for them. The religious leaders do not hear a cozy bedtime story. They hear a threat to their entire empire. They pick up stones to execute him. You can hear the heavy rocks grinding against the polished marble floor. They understand exactly what he is claiming. But the specific Greek word Jesus chooses in this exact moment completely breaks our modern translations. It changes his identity from a passive victim into a formidable king. I am the Good Shepherd. It is the most famous claim in the Gospel of John. Specifically, chapter 10, verse 11. When we read it in English, our modern cultural conditioning immediately kicks in. We hear the word good, and we think of someone who is pleasant. We picture a mild-mannered man petting a clean lamb, someone who is polite, gentle, and profoundly safe. But the specific word Jesus uses completely shatters that image. The phrase in the original text is ego eimi ho poimen ho kalos. The word translated as good is the Greek adjective kalos. This is a brilliant, deliberate choice. Greek has another common word for good, agathos, which means morally upright, beneficial, or practically useful. If Jesus just wanted to say he was an effective manager of the flock, he could have called himself the agathos shepherd. In the ancient world, the shepherd was not a romantic figure. He was dangerous. He lived on the rugged fringes of polite society, but he chooses kalos. And kalos means noble. It means magnificent. It carries the weight of something that is heroically, fiercely beautiful. In ancient Greek literature, kalos was the word used to describe a soldier who held the line when the phalanx was breaking in the heat of battle. It described the heavy bronze shield that absorbed a lethal spear thrust, so the man standing behind it could survive. It is a goodness tied to courage, to honor, to laying down your life in a spectacular display of devotion. That root changes everything. When a first-century listener heard kalos, they did not picture a quiet peasant taking a nap in a clover field. They pictured a champion. Jesus is not saying he is merely competent at finding grass. He is telling the religious elite that his defense of the vulnerable is a magnificent act of war. He is stepping into the gap, bracing his own body against the jagged rocks, and inviting the predators to try and break him. The goodness of God is not a fragile, passive niceness. It is a fierce, unbreakable nobility. He is a good shepherd because he is willing to bleed out in the dirt to keep the sheep breathing. And that is exactly what he does. The wolf strikes. The gate is breached. The shepherd is slaughtered on a Roman cross, sleeping out in the open, stretched across the gap of stone enclosures to block thieves with his own body. his lungs collapsing under the weight of his own torn body. But a dead shepherd cannot protect a flock. And the story does not end in a borrowed tomb. The noble shepherd walks out of the grave, but he knows his physical presence is not staying on the earth. The flock will remain in a world still crawling with thieves, still haunted by wolves. Someone has to hold the heavy iron rod, and the man Jesus chooses to carry it is a fisherman who just shattered his own vows. Sitting on a cold beach, shivering next to a charcoal fire, mist hangs heavy over the Sea of Galilee. The water is black and freezing in the early dawn. 7 men sit in a wooden boat, exhausted, their nets completely empty after a long night of labor. Then, a voice calls from the shoreline. The net is cast on the right side. The water violently churns with 153 heavy fish, and the fisherman who broke his vows throws himself into the cold sea. Swimming wildly for the beach, Peter drags himself out of the water. He stands shivering in the sand, and he smells it before he truly sees it. The refined Egyptians despised them. The wealthy city dwellers of Jericho and Jerusalem looked down on them. The sharp, smoky scent of a charcoal fire. The last time Peter stood near a charcoal fire, he was in a stone courtyard, warming his hands in the dark, swearing to a servant girl that he did not know the man inside being beaten to death. The sensory memory must have hit him like a physical blow. But Jesus does not point an accusing finger. The fire is not an interrogation. It is a reinstatement. Jesus roasts fish. He breaks bread. He looks at the man who shattered his own loyalty, and he asks a single question 3 times. Do you love me? 3 denials require 3 confessions. A fractured identity requires a complete restoration. But it is the command that follows each question that changes the trajectory of the early church. In English translations, it reads like a simple repetition: feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. But in the Greek text, Jesus is handing Peter 2 distinct tools. The first and third times, Jesus uses the Greek verb bosko. Bosko means to pasture. It means to nourish. It means to lead the flock to the grass and ensure the animals do not starve. It is the gentle work of finding the still waters. It is the wooden crook. But the second time, Jesus shifts the vocabulary. They were weather-beaten, rough-spoken, and armed. The shepherd is not a pacifist. He is a warrior in the pasture. He uses the verb poimino. Poimino is not about food. It is about authority. It means to govern, to rule, to stand guard, and to protect the perimeter. In classical Greek, it is the exact word used for the commanding of armies and the steering of a ship through a violent storm. It is the iron-studded rod. A fisherman breaks a vow. A savior cooks a meal. A king transfers a crown. Jesus is handing Peter the entire mantle of the warrior in the pasture. Nourish the young. Protect the vulnerable. Guide the strong. Guard the gate. The mandate is not a suggestion for a quiet pastoral life. It is a commission for a war zone. Peter takes the staff. He tends the flock. He will eventually bleed for the sheep, just like the noble shepherd did before him. But decades later, as an old man facing his own brutal execution at the hands of the Roman Empire, Peter writes one final letter. He writes to the other men holding the rod, and to remind them of who is really in charge. He uses a title for Jesus that appears nowhere else in the entire Bible. Look at the text of 1 Peter chapter 5. Rome is burning. The believers are scattered. The empire is sharpening its swords. The gods of the surrounding empires were depicted as distant monarchs sitting on golden thrones, shielded by massive armies and impenetrable stone walls. Peter is writing from the heart of the Roman beast. He can smell the smoke of persecution. He knows the wolves are already circling the edges of the Christian communities scattered across Asia Minor. He knows what happens when men get scared. They grab for control. They repeat the sins of Ezekiel's day, using their positions to feed themselves while the flock starves. So Peter hands the local elders the mandate, but he attaches a massive warning. Shepherd the flock of God. Do not do it under compulsion. Choose the dirt willingly. Do not do it for dirty money. Refuse the bribe. Do not lord your authority over the vulnerable. Lead by the scars on your own hands. Guard the gate. Hold the line. Bleed for the sheep. And then, to ensure no human leader ever confuses themselves with the divine, Peter drops a word. Verse 4 contains a Greek title that appears literally nowhere else in the entire span of the Bible. He calls Jesus the archepoimen, the chief shepherd. The prefix is archi. It means first in rank, principal, or supreme ruler. It is the root for words like archangel and architect. Peter takes the fierce, noble warrior, the kalos poimen from John chapter 10, and elevates him to the absolute highest rank of cosmic authority. But the God of Israel chose a completely different title. He chose the identity of a man who slept in the dirt. The archepoimen is not just tending a local pasture. He is overseeing every sheep, in every ravine, across every century. This title dismantles the ego of every human leader. The local pastor is not the sovereign of the field. He is a temporary sentry waiting for the king. The flock does not belong to the man holding the wooden crook. The flock belongs to the supreme commander who bought the animals, with the iron nails driven through his own wrists. When the archepoimen appears, Peter promises, the faithful stewards will receive a crown of glory that will never fade. The ancient hierarchy was flawless. The boundaries were absolutely clear. The shepherd protects the sheep, and the chief shepherd protects the shepherds. But the modern mind has tried to erase the harsh realities of the pasture. We have traded the jagged rocks of the Judean wilderness for padded carpets and comfortable theology. And in the process, we have forgotten how to recognize the predator that is already sleeping inside the gate. Picture the ancient Judean sheepfold one last time. The sun sinks below the jagged limestone, and the air turns freezing cold. The shepherd lays his battered body across the narrow gap of the stone wall. He is listening for the crack of a dry branch, waiting for an enemy he can see. Strike and kill. But the predators haunting your life do not usually snap twigs in the dark, who fought off lions with a crude weapon, and who smelled like the desperate animals he bled to keep alive. If you are living in the modern world, the wolf you are facing is likely invisible. It is the creeping exhaustion that wakes you up at 3 in the morning with a chest tight from an anxiety you cannot name. It is the overwhelming, quiet despair that tells you your past betrayals have permanently disqualified you from the table. It is the cultural pressure that constantly demands you build your own empire, guard your own reputation, and manufacture your own safety. We have forgotten what it means to be a sheep. We spend our decades desperately trying to hold the iron rod ourselves. We try to beat back the shadows with our own strength, our own bank accounts, our own frantic schedules, and our own carefully curated public images. We try to scout our own green pastures and dam our own still waters, dragging ourselves through the wilderness without a guide. This relentless self-reliance is not maturity. It is a terrifying vulnerability. When you try to be your own shepherd, you leave the gate completely undefended. The ancient text warns that the human mind cannot outsmart the spiritual predator. The wolf of shame does not care about your resume. The thief of anxiety is not deterred by your carefully planned calendar. They slip right past your human defenses and tear into your peace. If you are in a season where you are completely exhausted from trying to understand why this matters, you have to strip away centuries of safe, domestic religion. You have to step back into the heat and the danger of the ancient hills to fight off the darkness alone. You need to remember the geography of the ancient pasture. The flock is not required to fight the lion. The sheep are not commanded to devise tactical defensive strategies against the thief. The only responsibility of the animal is to stay close enough to hear the voice of the man holding the weapon. The noble shepherd, the kalos poimen, did not lay down his life just to give you a comforting metaphor to frame in a hallway. He stepped into the dirt to take the violence meant for you. He holds the heavy, iron-studded club so that you can finally close your eyes and breathe deeply, right in the middle of the valley, completely surrounded by your enemies. And when you trace his footsteps through the dust of the entire biblical narrative, you realize He has been holding that weapon for his people since the world began. The dry wind blows across the ancient Judean pasture. The campfire burns down to white embers in the dark. The man holding the iron rod stands up, turns his back to the sheep, and watches the horizon. A fugitive prince learned the barren ravines for 40 years and guided a terrified nation safely through the sea. The air smells of dust, crushed wild thyme, and the heavy musk of sheep. He holds a short wooden club with a thick, bulbous head because the answer changes how you read every psalm you thought you knew, every prophetic warning, and every promise Jesus ever made. A forgotten youngest brother shattered the jaw of a lion and stepped onto the battlefield to forge a kingdom. A hunted king sang a survival song in a dark canyon, and the iron-studded club became the ultimate symbol of comfort. A prophet watched the elite devour the vulnerable, and God promised to step into the dirt to take back the flock. A carpenter stood in the freezing temple to claim the noble title and laid his physical body across the jagged stones of the gate. A fisherman stood shivering by a charcoal fire on the beach and received the heavy mandate to hold the line. An old man faced the brutal violence of Rome and pointed a scattered church to the chief shepherd who oversees every ravine. One title, one fierce protector. But here is the part I keep coming back to. It is the physical body blocking the gap in the wall. Not a distant monarch sitting securely on a golden throne. Not a safe, abstract theology. It is a God who chooses the dirt, who smells like the desperate animals he refuses to abandon, and who willingly absorbs the lethal teeth of the predator, so the sheep behind him can simply breathe. If you are in a season where the predators feel entirely too close, where the anxiety is loud in the middle of the night, the title was never meant to make you feel cozy. It was meant to make you feel secure. And your own strength to fight it is completely gone. You do not have to fight the wolf. The flock is not required to carry the weapon. You only have to stay close enough to hear the voice of the man who does. If this opens something in you, hit subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to guard their own gate. And please pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who has never once abandoned the pasture walk with you through your deepest valley and keep you completely secure behind the strike of his iron rod. But to feel the weight of that security, you have to start where the biblical writers started. You cannot begin in the quiet meadows. You have to begin in the dry, lethal expanse of the wilderness, watching a fugitive prince learn how to survive. Before a man could be trusted with a nation, the biblical pattern demanded he first smell like a flock. In the ancient Near East, kings often called themselves shepherds. It was a common political title stamped on clay tablets in Babylon and carved into the stone monuments of Assyria. But for the writers of Scripture, it was not just a piece of royal propaganda. It was a literal, physical prerequisite. Consider the trajectory of Moses. He spends 40 years in the courts of Egypt, absorbing the highest military strategy and statecraft of the greatest empire on earth. Yet, when the time comes to deliver Israel, God uses none of it. Instead, Moses is driven into the blistering heat of the Midianite desert. For 40 years, he learns the topography of the wasteland. The wood is nicked, splintered in places, and stained black. He is not meditating on the quiet evening, tracks shifting weather patterns across the sand, and guides stubborn, defenseless animals through barren ravines to find hidden patches of green. The wilderness was not a penalty for his anger. It was the curriculum for his calling. He had to learn how to keep a flock alive before he could be trusted to navigate a human stampede across the Red Sea. He had to learn the pace of the weakest lamb. And then there is the youngest son of Jesse. While his older brothers wear the polished bronze armor of Israel's regular army, David is out in the dirt. He is completely overlooked, isolated in the Judean hills. But he is not just writing poetry in the grass. He is practicing with a leather sling until the smooth stone hums through the air and shatters a target at 50 paces. He is wrestling a bear in the heavy brush. He is grabbing a lion by its coarse mane and driving a makeshift club into its skull. When David finally stands before King Saul to volunteer for the fight against Goliath, he does not present a military pedigree. He presents a shepherd's resume. The sheep were not a distraction from his royal destiny. They were the crucible that forged his capacity for war. To the ancient mind, the shepherd did not just guide. He guarded. He carried two distinct tools at his belt. He is watching the dark edges of the ravine, listening for the snap of a twig or the low, rhythmic breathing of a predator. He carried the staff, a long wooden pole with a crook, used to gently hook a wandering sheep by the chest and pull it back from a crumbling cliff edge. But he also carried the rod. The rod was a heavy, thick piece of oak, often embedded with bits of iron or bone, used exclusively to crack the ribs of wolves and shatter the jaws of thieves. Comfort for the flock required lethal violence toward the predator. And it is this dual reality, the gentle crook and the iron club, that entirely changes how you read the most famous poem in human history. David sits in a narrow limestone canyon. The rock walls rise steep and jagged on both sides. The light fades fast. The shadows stretch long and black across the dirt. It is the valley of deep darkness. He is hunted. Saul's men are closing in. Lions wait in the caves above. His breathing is steady. He picks up his instrument. He sings a song the modern world has turned into a funeral dirge. We whisper it at bedsides. We recite it over graves in hushed, mournful tones. But David is not preparing to die. He is preparing to outlast his enemies. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In the ancient dirt, this is not a sweet sentiment. This is a defiant roar. This is the man the ancient world knew. This is the figure that built a nation, shaped a dynasty, and became the ultimate self-portrait of the divine. David looks at the black canyon walls. He feels the damp chill in the air. He knows the predators are waiting just beyond the firelight, and he declares his absolute defense. Green pastures are not manicured lawns in this geography. They are tiny, hard-won patches of grass hidden deep in the unforgiving hills. Still waters are not tranquil lakes. They are fast-moving streams the shepherd has deliberately blocked with stones so the terrified sheep can drink without drowning in the current. The shepherd scouts the path. He finds the grass. He dams the water. He restores the breath of the exhausted animal. And then the shadow falls. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because the sheep suddenly feel brave? Because the valley is actually safe? For you are with me, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. This is where the stained glass window shatters. The comfort is not a soft pillow or a gentle whisper. The comfort is the heavy, bone-crushing club in the shepherd's hand. The sheep do not feel safe because the predators have vanished. They feel safe because the shepherd is violently opposed to the predators. He holds the crook to pull them back from the edge. He holds the iron-studded rod to shatter the jaw of the wolf. Psalm 23 is not a lullaby for the dying. It is a survival song for the living. The scene shifts from the pasture to a banquet. You have probably seen the stained glass windows, the paintings that hang in hallways and church foyers. God sets a table. He roasts the meat. He pours the wine. Right in the middle of a war zone. In the presence of my enemies, you can smell the rich smoke of the fire. You can feel the heavy, fragrant oil running down David's head, soaking into his hair, sealing his wind-chapped skin. The oil is the mark of an honored guest, and the enemies are paralyzed. They have to stand at the edge of the firelight and watch. They cannot touch him. The armed shepherd stands guard at the perimeter. Goodness pursues him. Mercy hunts him down. The flock is completely secure under the watchful eye of a good king. But the staff is only as safe as the man holding it. And hundreds of years after David, the men entrusted with the club decide to turn it against the very flock they were commanded to protect. Fast forward a few centuries, and the pastoral ideal has rotted from the inside out. The kings, the priests, and the political elite of Israel were supposed to carry the mantle of David. They were given the staff to protect the vulnerable and the iron rod to fend off the surrounding empires. But human nature, when handed unchecked authority, rarely remains gentle. By the time of the prophet Ezekiel, the leaders of the nation are no longer watching. The ravines for wolves, They have become the wolves. Ezekiel chapter 34 is one of the most blistering pieces of literature in the ancient world. They show a pale, gentle figure in a pristine white robe, cradling a freshly washed lamb while walking through a manicured emerald green European meadow. The prophet looks at the corrupt elite men draped in heavy, dyed wool, feasting on prime cuts of roasted meat while the poor starve in the streets, and he delivers a divine eviction notice. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to look at the Hebrew word hiding beneath the English text. The word translated as shepherd is the Hebrew ra'ah. It appears hundreds of times in the Old Testament, and its range of meaning carries a fascinating tension. The primary meaning of ra'ah is to pasture, to tend, and to feed. But in ancient Semitic languages, it is also the definitive word for ruling. A shepherd is a sovereign. And here is where the etymology gets dangerous, depending on how the root is vocalized. Ra'ah is intricately linked to another Hebrew concept, meaning to break, to crush, or to shatter. It is the exact same tension we saw in the rod and the staff. The authority to guide is inseparable from the power to break. But Ezekiel's contemporaries had reversed the flow of that power. They used the staff to break the sheep, while letting the predators roam free. They weaponized their spiritual and political authority to build their own empires, harvesting the flock instead of healing it. Most people look at those images and assume the biblical shepherd is a symbol of soft, passive care. If watching religious leaders use their authority to consume the vulnerable makes you angry, or if you are tired of a system that protects the powerful instead of the broken, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig into the ancient texts to uncover a God who is not complicit in our corruption. So God issues a terrifying promise. He fires the elite. He steps into the pasture himself. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. Ed declares in verse 10, I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. God announces that he is taking back the crook and the iron club. The divine rescue operation is not a bureaucratic shift in management. It is a hostile takeover. God says he will personally search for the lost, bind up the injured, and strengthen the weak. But to the fat and the strong, to the abusers who trampled the pasture and muddied the drinking water with their feet, he promises to shepherd them with justice. The role of the shepherd was not an invitation to privilege. It was a vow of self-sacrifice. Ezekiel leaves the ancient Israelites with a burning anticipation. God promised to come down into the dirt and shepherd the flock himself. But for centuries, the pasture remained eerily quiet, waiting for the true Ra'ah to appear. And then, a carpenter walks into the temple courts during winter. They think it is a metaphor for comfort, safety, and a quiet, unbothered retreat from the world. A cold wind sweeps across the Temple Mount. It is winter in Jerusalem. The Feast of Dedication is underway. The towering marble pillars of Solomon's colonnade are freezing to the touch. Jesus walks through the grand courtyard. The religious elite surround him. They close the circle. They trap him against the stone. They demand a clear answer. How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. But Jesus has already told them. He told them with his actions days earlier. Right outside these walls, a man born blind receives his sight. The elite interrogate him. They insult him. They throw him out into the street. The appointed shepherds of Israel take a vulnerable sheep and hurl it directly to the wolves. Ezekiel's ancient nightmare is playing out in real time. The leaders protect their power. They discard the broken. They muddy the waters. And then Jesus goes out and finds the man. He does exactly what Ezekiel promised God would do. He searches for the scattered. He binds up the injured. He gathers the outcast. Then Jesus turns to the men in the fine robes. He looks at the elite holding the religious authority.